Personal connection. Pilots called it a sports car when clean and a trap when dirty. The same airframe that climbed and turned better than its peers demanded exact throttle hands on approach, especially at night. We'll explain why. The wing that tilted up to keep the nose down, the slats and drooping ailerons that tamed the edge, and the thrust vertical coupling that made small errors expensive. Then we'll place it in its real combat context. Missiles first, guns when they worked, and tactics built around paired cooperation. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. We left the cockpit with a simple claim. The wing moved so the nose didn't. That choice answered a carrier problem that had nagged Navy fighters since the war. On approach, high angle of attack buried the optical landing system and the deck behind a rising nose, and pilots chased cues they could barely see. Vaught's counter was to shift geometry rather than technique. Raise the entire wing by several degrees for landing, and you keep the fuselage roughly level. The hook sits where it should, and the pilot sees the meatball. Moving a whole wing sounds excessive because it is a structural and systems mess if you do it badly. Hinges must carry bending loads. Actuators must survive repeated cycles in salt air, and the load path has to run through a pivot without turning the wing into a tuning fork. It worked on the Crusader because the architecture concentrated strength at the rear spar, treated the pivot as a primary joint, and kept the kinematics simple. The motion is small, the benefit is large, and the rest of the airframe accepts it without drama. Mechanically, the wing pivots around that rear spar. Dial in incidence for approach, and the wing sees more angle. Leave the fuselage nearer level. The pilot now looks over a flatter nose line and reads the optical landing system properly, and because the tail sits lower relative to the airflow, the arresting hook presents a better attitude to the wire. Think of it as tilting a clipboard toward your eyes instead of craning your neck. The surface does the work. Low-speed lift needed more than incidence. The Crusader stacked devices. Full-span leading-edge slats that came out at high angle of attack to keep flow attached, and ailerons that drooped to act like flaps while still controlling roll. The combined effect raised maximum lift coefficient, and the extra incidence preserved tail clearance without forcing a dramatic nose-high posture. So you got slower, controlled flight in the groove with the runway cues still in view. Once clean, the airplane made a different bargain. The wing locked down for transonic and supersonic work. The planform stayed tidy for drag, and most fuel sat in the fuselage to help area ruling and longitudinal stability. The structure treated the wing as weight-bearing without carrying a penalty from the pivot, which mattered because every unnecessary pound at the tips costs maneuver margin. It was therefore a fighter first, with a landing trick that disappeared when speed mattered. By way of example, early trials credited the Crusader with strong climb and sharp instantaneous turn, while still letting crews hold the meatball throughout approach. Users praised that because it removed a basic conflict. See the deck and fly the numbers at the same time. One way or another, that operational clarity mattered more than any brochure speed. It also carried a historical first. This was the first production fighter to fly with a variable incidence wing. Others had chased more flaps or blew air over surfaces. Vought moved the geometry upstream and treated flaps as supplements rather than the only lever. The research focus was specific. Keep high-speed aerodynamics intact and solve the landing sightline on demand. The mini payoff is straightforward. The Crusader split the job into two defined states. In one, the jet stayed sleek and fast. In the other, the pilot saw the meatball, the hook sat correctly, and the wing carried more lift at a manageable attitude. Clean and dirty became two honest configurations rather than a compromise smeared across the entire envelope. But once the wing came up, that new geometry brought narrow margins and tight coupling in power and pitch, and the dirty F-8 started to reveal how high the price of that visibility could run. The same geometry that lowered the nose on approach also wired power to flight path in a way that charged interest on tiny mistakes. With the wing raised, the gear and flaps down, and the jet flying on the backside of the power curve, you fly angle of attack and throttle rather than airspeed. The book number around 147 knots sounds ordinary for a carrier fighter, but the airplane's response pattern is not ordinary, and by this point, the workload climbs the moment you touch the groove. Backside means energy management by thrust. Reduce power and drag outpaces lift, so rate of descent increases and the airplane seeks a lower flight path even if pitch looks similar. Add power and lift rises with a short lag, but the thrust line and blown flow shift the lift vector quickly enough that the nose and the vertical path start to move together. On a steady runway, you can sort that. On a carrier that heaves, rolls, and yaws under you, correction stack and then chase the deck. Pilots found the jet predictable, clean, but with the wing up, the attitude cues and power response could feel abrupt. The sightline is better, which invites you to trust what you see, yet the airplane reacts to throttle like a lever on glide path. Add a little too much, and you balloon through the meatball. Pull a little too much, and you sink toward the ramp faster than the pitch attitude suggests. It was therefore a configuration that asked for steady hands and small moves. The data record hints at the price of that narrow corridor. The type saw a high accident rate for late 1950s carrier jets, and by 1966, more than 500 ejections had been recorded across all models, beginning in 1956 and continuing into 1997 with the French Navy. If you sum all of that up, the fleet lost roughly 41% of 1,261 airframes one way or another, which maps to a platform that punished lapses and exposed margins during demanding phases of flight. Night traps were the hardest because the horizon dissolves, and the ship's motion dominates your cues. The F-8's throttle to vertical path sensitivity under those conditions raised the odds of ramp strikes and bolters. You ride the meatball and the lineup bars, but the deck is no longer a fixed plane. It moves up while your last throttle touch still plays out, and the rate math no longer matches what your inner ear sells you. By this point, crews respected how quickly a stable pass could diverge. Maintenance realities added another layer without causing the deck issues. Gun systems could jam under high G in combat, which pushed reliance toward missiles in the air war. But on the boat, the risks centered on systems management and technique. Fuel trim, slat and flap checks, and disciplined throttle work mattered more than any single hardware quirk. Operators did respond. Auto throttle refinements helped damp overcorrection and held target angle of attack more consistently, and training syllabi began to hammer precise power handling in the groove. Later, the French F-8 EFN applied boundary layer control by blowing engine air over flaps and ailerons, paired with higher incidence limits and enlarged tail surfaces, to boost low-speed lift and soften the onset of sink. It didn't erase the coupling, but it widened the lane. So the mini payoff is blunt. The variable incidence wing preserved visibility and hook geometry, but it also concentrated approach control into a tight band where throttle equaled altitude almost immediately. Effective, yes, and unforgiving. In any case, that landing temperament fed directly into how the Crusader was flown in combat. Missiles were the primary tools, the guns worked when they worked, and the community adapted its tactics around those strengths and limits. Solving the sightline problem didn't come free. The variable incidence wing shifted the burden to the pilot's hands in the groove. It was therefore ingenious as hardware and costly as workload, a rare trade that made the airplane both safer to see and harder to land well. If you want a deeper dive on the French F-8 EFN slow-speed fixes and Vietnam missile versus gun data, say so in the comments and we'll open the flight manual, charts and all. Engineering rarely gives free gains. One way or another, the Crusader proved that every knot and every degree carried a bill, and the program paid it in training and attrition.